So it's day 2 of my Ned Boulting Stalkathon. Not quite, but we are finishing off our project today, bringing you inside the world of sports broadcasting and giving you a peek behind the curtain, if you like. Ned is in action this afternoon. I'm going to be watching him do his stuff alongside former professional David Millar. They're commentating on the Vuelta a Espana for 3 weeks. And you can probably tell, even from inside my car, I'm not in Spain. We're in Ealing in West London, commentating from Ealing Studios. So it'll be really interesting to see their setup here. Let's go.
8 former stage winners in the Vuelta and the 20 men in the breakaway. Julien Alaphilippe being the most recently crowned. And Anthony Roux, who you can see right in the middle of your picture there, number 168 for FDJ, won a stage in the Vuelta in 2009. So there's a lot of talent. And there's JJ Rojas. Again.
I think this is harder actually because of the kind of, you have to, because you're not commentating, and then suddenly you're kind of called upon to commentate and you're not really warmed up. And you know, it's kind of recorded, so there is a potential to go again, but you really don't, I mean, we don't, you know, except in real extremists, ever sort of redo anything because you want it to be like, so there's another way of doing it potentially where you could edit the highlights pictures and then commentate to the highlights pictures.
Because I've always wondered which it is, actually.
Yeah, no, we don't do that because then the temptation is to know too much, right? And it'd be really
in hindsight,
it'd be really quite difficult, you know, because then you'd end up living like a smart ass.
You'd be very, very knowledgeable, though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you'd be anticipating moves, and it would be kind of difficult to sound surprised. Actually, genuinely sort of like engaged and surprised.
1 or 2 teams now ranging up alongside the black and blue train of Team Sky, who have Chris Froome on their wheel. Noticeably, Marco Haller and Michael Murcu from Katusha Alpecin.
And also, cycling commentary, I think, inevitably has rough edges, doesn't it? Because, you know, there are times when you can't identify riders, or you misidentify them, or you kind of... So, again, you'd have to almost build in the rough edges.
David.
It's a breakaway.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Pre-highlighted.
Brilliant. I'm going to get to say Tom's Skoinch.
What?
I'm going to get to say Tom's Skoinch on the telly. David.
Tom's Squinch.
Tom's
Squinch.
Skoinch.
Do either of you, and I'm conscious that you're both working, and
that's all right. David's not.
But do either of you watch this and think you'd rather you were there? Do you get FOMO?
Well, it's a bit weird for me because I'm doing this job from home, which is, I was talking to you yesterday, it's actually, I mean, obviously it's harder to do the race by remote control because you're not there, you can't, you know, you don't have a fine feel for what's going on in the race to some extent. In terms of lifestyle, it's really quite nice to be going home to my own bed every night and, you know, have breakfast at home. But it's a bit weird for David because he's away from home as well as not being at the race. In fact, he's left the country in which the race is happening
to commentate on the race.
To commentate on the race. So
Yeah,
that's a bit weird.
ideal.
But he's like, he stays in the same hotel around the corner, and he's become like, because he's been using it for a couple of years now, he's become like the major in Fawlty Towers, the longest term resident. Do you know all the staff by name?
No, I don't know any of their names.
You haven't asked any of their names?
No, it's horrible, isn't it? I think probably over the top of the next one.
They'll
see they'll see the attrition on this one, and then then it's moves will have to start in the Cat 2.
So, should we bother with this? Okay. I'll keep all my best lines back.
Yeah.
All of them.
So we're kind of trying to debate where it's most likely going to happen. I mean, if Contador starts saying something silly, we'll just burst straight into commentary mode there, and then they'll work out which, you know, how to cut it down. A little move goes off the front from Luis Angel Mate from Cofidis, the Andalusian rider, Spaniard. Haven't seen much of Cofidis. They have a rider in the breakaway, and Mate has just chosen that slight lull after the Katusha pace setting.
So in this stage, you're just sort of paying attention to what's happening, taking notes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, I suppose the advantage is, you know, when you're commentator, as we did on the tour, from tape to what do you call it, gun to tape or whatever, then the breakaway, you know, that's always a chaotic phase of the race when the break goes. And today it took best part of 60 kilometres to go before we got live pictures. But if that had been live, that would have been kind of frenetic commentating for an hour because all you'd have seen would have been that kind of shaky Moto2 shot of riders just pegging off the front, and you'd have to try and identify them. It'd be ages before you actually got their positive ID sort of like confirmed.
It's too far ahead now anyway.
Conrad. Patrick Conrad. The longer a stage race goes on, the easier that becomes, because by and large it's the same. Like today, the riders who are in the breakaway are the usual suspects, like almost without exception. I think every single one of these has been in a breakaway at some point. Alessandro De Marchi's been in like 6. This is his 6th breakaway on the Vuelta.
Alessandro De Marchi's won 2 stages on the Vuelta. Magnus Cort Nielsen, 2 stages on last year's Vuelta. Alexis Goujard, a 2015 stage winner from AG2 A La Mondiale.
And so do you have the road book open at all the monuments in history and whatnot? Do you just sort of...
Hey up, show you.
Ah, now this is different.
There you go.
I've never seen one of
Yeah,
these.
don't get near. That's a state secret. That I've just
Ah.
blown completely by showing it to you. It's helpful to the extent that it's really confusing, right? so suddenly you'll get like
Yeah.
right, and you look down at that, and you can sometimes hear it on the commentary. I'm sure you'll hear
yeah.
normally from David like that. As you look down, you go lost customer. So then you find it. You go, okay, it's that one, because they're not on, the graphic doesn't always appear. You go, and they'll give you a rough idea normally of how many kilometres it is into the stage. Can't see it there anyway. But then what they've done is they've compiled this book, but I think they've just paid an intern at ASO, to kind of trawl through French Wikipedia sites and use Google
Right.
Translate and just do loads of cutting and pasting. Because then so you're reading frantically. Its main building is Renaissance in line with the wishes of Jean de Los, with a facade of dressed yellow limestone, built between 1570 and 1576, wedged between walls and deep moats on 3 sides and terraced gardens, awarded Jardin Remarquable label in 2004 by the Ministry. That is not something
No, that's going to
that you
brighten
need
up
to.
a dull
That's
stage.
not going to help. But there might be something in there that is kind of interesting, and if you can very quickly distill it down to some sort of nugget that's broadcast, and not often you'll only have kind of like 15 seconds before the shot changes as well, at which point it's gone and you might as well just throw the book away. So you do develop a slightly risible skill at kind of like just panning for gold in these paragraphs.
A lot of riders were caught out there, so that's the sort of move. Because Katusha just pulled that out of nowhere, everyone was just quite happy with Team Sky leading the peloton, and Katusha did that, well, what was essentially almost a team attack. I think there were a lot of riders further back that then, when all the weaker riders in front of them got caught out and were opening up the gaps, they got stuck behind like this.
So we stayed in a... That didn't feature on the coverage, but we stayed in a guest house right next to that statue, funnily enough. So every now and again, because you're actually on the road, you will cross paths with this directly. And there was a stage in the Vosges Mountains where we ended up staying in a guest house at the foot of the hill, where there was a Le Corbusier chapel at the top that is kind of world famous, and we both remember seeing, kind of like reading about. And we were in the morning at breakfast, we kind of like happened upon the fact that this chapel was literally just there. So we rode our Bromptons up to go and have a look at the chapel before we then went to work. And again, you can't do that by remote control if you're not on the race.
And that's, do you think maybe, or I think anyway, what's so beautiful about the Tour de France is you can tell that the commentators are there. You can feel it. You can breathe it in their words.
Yeah, it's
and
an
it does make a
intangible thing, isn't
difference.
it? There's something intangible about that. But we do try, particularly last year, we tried to recce as much of the final climb or the final 20k or whatever on our bikes as we possibly could. I mean, I remember stage 2 of the 2016 tour, which was the first year that David and I did the Tour de France. The run into the finish line in Sagan one in Cherbourg in the pouring rain, and that was if you just looked at the road book, it wouldn't have told you much really about the width of the roads, the severity of the little climbs. I don't know if you remember, it was one of those little full of little things up to the finish line, and we actually rode that in the pouring rain, but it was incredibly instructive when it came to calling the race, because David was able to talk me through it, how there'd be a furious battle for position on this left-hand turn because the road goes from being a dual carriageway to a single track thing, and so that's useful as well. That's really useful, and you do miss out. Yesterday's finish on the Vuelta, having not actually been on the finish line, was tough to call because it was really hard to see from the roadbook alone that they kind of got over a climb, and did it drop down to the finish line or not? Well, in fact, it kind of barely did, but the roadbook suggested it really dipped down, and so that was slightly deceptive.
Yeah.
And you do miss that out, definitely.
It strikes me that commentating on the Tour in particular must be a very satisfying experience, in the sense that you're gathering all this information that you've stored up in your head, and then you're able to spout all of that forth, get it out there, and it's done and dusted. The stage is done, and you move on to the next one. So you're using everything up, you're consuming as you go. It must be quite intellectually satisfying in that sense.
That is true. But quite often you're frustrated because there's something you want to say about a particular rider that, you know, is kind of really interesting or just a bit different, and you think, oh, stay in the breakaway, so and then they get caught, and you think, well, I can't talk. Why would I talk about him now? He's just another one of that. You know. So you have to wait until that rider gets in a breakaway again to impart that kind of knowledge. That's Richard Carapaz, I can see, from Movistar. I think every commentator does a little personal database of stuff that you've built, and it kind of like, as the years go by, you kind of becomes more and more layered. You know, and you build up that impression of a rider that then you can access. You know, as soon as they attack or they're in a break, you remind yourself, oh yeah, I remember that day on the thing. He can climb, he can do everything, very versatile, but never in his wildest dreams, I don't think, would he imagine that on the 2017 Vuelta he would be riding to a famous victory. They're going to take stage win number 3, Lotto Soudal, and this time for Belgium, denying Spain once again a stage win on stage 18. It's going to go elsewhere. This time Lotto Soudal take the win, and this time Sander Armé finally can allow a broad smile to break over his features through the pain, through the grimace. He's done enough. He can zip up and celebrate and take a bow. That is a statement from Chris Froome, of whom questions were asked yesterday big time by the way he raced and the way he was dropped by Nibali. This time he's doing the damage to Vincenzo Nibali, so he's turning tables on the Italian.
You'll be getting told on the radio, look, there's Vincenzo Nibali head down, just trying to limit his losses now. Alberto Contador now working with Chris Froome.
So that is just about that. But Froome made his statement, he made it count, and Vincenzo Nibali will know all about that. It'll bolster this man's confidence, but it might have dented Nibali's going into the Angliru and tomorrow's testing stage 2. Replay, yeah. And I'll have to think of something else to say about Sander Armé.